Thank you, Emma, and thanks to all of you for coming. I'm Danny Russell, as Emma mentioned, Vice President of Asia Society Policy Institute, and these are two of the people in the Japan policy world who I really admire the most, so I'm excited to have them here. I'll start with the one who traveled the furthest, Professor Kitaoka. Won't run through his entire biography. It's in the program. He's got a long list of titles and a distinguished record, but suffice it to say that Professor Kitaoka is Japan's prominent foreign policy scholar and practitioner who's really had a profound effect on Japanese strategic vision and its global engagement. So we're very lucky to have him and appreciate him traveling all the way to New York. We also have Dr. Sheila Smith, who is a friend to me and to many of us from that obscure organization, the Council on Foreign Relations, a fellow New York operation. And Sheila's a genuine expert and a leading voice on Japanese politics, on U.S.-Japan relations, and on East Asia security. So we absolutely could not have a better pair of people to grapple with the issues of the strategic and the political challenges to the U.S.-Japan alliance in 2025. The first session, in effect, set something of a baseline discussing what's been accomplished in the relationship in the alliance. What are some of the strengths, missions that have been developed. Having talked a bit about what we have done as Japan and the United States, now I think it makes sense to turn to the broader question of, okay, we just dipped our toe into 2025. There's been a lot of change and a lot of change is underway. What are we up against? What are we looking at? What is the external environment that the partnership is facing in 2025 and in the years ahead? Now, I'm always guided by and chastened by the wisdom of Yogi Berra, who famously said that predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future. So it's not so much a matter of predictions, I think, as it is of trying to identify and assess, analyze a bit about what are we facing. Japanese leaders from Abe to Suga to Kishida to Ishiba have used formulas about Japan facing a very severe external international environment. Xi Jinping, for that matter, certainly from the 20th Party Congress on, has talked about the high seas and strong winds and so on. The point is that there are a lot of challenges in multiple domains, and I'd love to begin by asking Professor Kitaoka to just give us your view of the landscape. What are the priority challenges from the Japanese perspective that you feel really need to be confronted or tackled or heading at Japan in this coming year?
Thank you, Dan. Also, I thank you very much for inviting me to this very important gathering. Because I'm an original historian, so I tend to think historically. So before getting into the future, let me go back a little bit the past. The Cold War was over in 1989, but still, up until 2010, Japan's focus of self-defense forces was in Hokkaido, faced with Russia. And then this shows how slow Japan was moving. Of course, Japan's security policy was started from the very difficult Article 9 of the Constitution. So Japan had to go through very difficult changes. But, Japan was very slow. Even it took almost 10 years to make the shift from Hokkaido to Southwest. And then I can say that I was instrumental to make this change realized. And I have to say that this was made possible under DPJ government, not by LDP government, because LDP government was so much committed to the self-defense forces in Hokkaido, so it was very difficult to change. But sometimes change of politics may contribute to some change. And also, I have been working on this issue, on the issue of security for many years continuously. The next challenge was that Japan's focus was, Japan always said that the biggest threat is North Korea. And we are ready to make, to build a missile defense against that. But I tried to say that, no, just be honest. Bigger threat is China. And the missile defense is not enough. So we have to look at China as a major threat, and then we have to change from missile defense to counter-strike capability. I began to say that I just confided this one with Prime Minister Abe in 2013. He was basically in accordance with me, but actually it took, several years for this to be realized. And even within the Ministry of Defense, there was some resistance. Even among the politicians, there was some resistance. So it took a lot of years, many years, for the counter-strike capability to be adopted in 2022. Therefore, it took 9 years for me to persuade the government and bureaucrats. Why it was made possible? Because of the Russian invasion into Ukraine. So I think that the biggest change that took place in Asia because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine was Japan's becoming a normal country, apart from the abnormal country. And then, so having said that, as a whole, I believe that China is a relatively cautious country in starting a war. They may not start a war unless they are confident that they can win a war easily in a short period of time. But war can be started by mistake. Therefore, we have to engage with them cautiously, continuously, and also we have to prepare for that. If they face a difficulty when they start the war against Taiwan or other places, then that may mean a crisis for the regime. So they will avoid that kind of possibility. But still, there's some possibility. Therefore, the best way to peace is raising the level of deterrence, and on the part of Japan and the United States and so forth. Therefore, the biggest concern is whether or not U.S. commitment to Taiwan is really sure and reliable. Taiwan is very, very important for us. Taiwan is not only a friendly country to Japan, Taiwan is not only a very democratic country near Japan. Also, if Taiwan falls into the hands of China, then certainly Chinese government will build a very big, good seaports on the eastern coast of Taiwan, and which is very close to the very deep sea. So that may become a very good place for submarines to hide. Therefore, in that case, the Japan's trade, as well as Korean trade, will be in danger in a very difficult situation. Therefore, because of those reasons, Taiwan is very necessary for us. After many years and after some many efforts, we are now coming close to the level of completion of our, preparedness. If Taiwan is attacked, if U.S. joins to help Taiwan, then we can join the United States. But the first condition, whether or not U.S. is really committed to the security of Taiwan, that's the biggest concern. The second point is that, now between the major battlefield, between Japan and China was Southeast Asia. Since the time of Belt and Way, as a president of JICA, we have to pay enough attention to that area. Now the balance between of those countries, there are some countries, now they are now China is becoming more influential than the United States. Number one was Malaysia is coming close to China, then followed by Indonesia, and on our side, Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore. Therefore, what's important is what to do over there. I don't support the Mr. Ishiba's Asian NATO. I have been proposing since several years ago that how about creating a, Western Pacific Union that is somewhat similar to EU. Some political coordination between Japan, ASEAN countries, and also, if possible, Bangladesh to Australia and Pacific Island countries. Japan has been working in that area very much. Japan has accumulated a lot of direct investment over there, but still the Chinese approach is increasing, and they are making a strong offensive over there. And what we are doing is that for many years we have been supporting the building of Coast Guard in the Philippines and Indonesia, which was very much appreciated. Because in the Philippines, which consists of 7,000 islands, Indonesia double. Without effective Coast Guard, they cannot handle the issue of illegal trafficking or piracy. And then it was very much appreciated. Japan has a long tradition of naval country. As a naval country, we are supporting them, providing the ships, vessels over there, and also training the young people from Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and other people in Tokyo for 1 year. And for the second year, our training is given in Hiroshima. Such kind of approach is very necessary. We have to continue this one. One more thing, therefore, that's why I think that we have to make a more initiative to Southeast Asia so that we can get those countries on our side. Malaysia and Indonesia and Thailand have proposed to be the part of BRICS. We have to keep us on our side so that they can become the member of the OECD. They are wondering which they should go. One more thing is that one of the reasons why Malaysia and Indonesia is going to their side is a Palestine issue. They are becoming very much anti-America because of the tragedy in Palestine. We have to, stop to some extent. I think of course Hamas activities are terrorist, which is unforgivable. But still, the Israel activity is also beyond the border, beyond the international law. So we have to make some compromise over there to complete it. Therefore, there are many countries. At the United Nations, at the very beginning of the Russia invasion into Ukraine, in March 2022, there was overwhelming support for the Ukraine. That's number was 140 to 50 or something like that. But still, that was a peak. The support of for the criticism against Russia is waning. We have to change this one. And then, in order to do that, we have to make a more approach to the developing countries, as I was told by Ambassador Ishii. We have to embrace those developing countries. Now, which country can do this? Japan. Now, Japan was once a developing country, and then only one country among G7 from non-Western countries. Therefore, Japan's responsibility toward the developing countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, is very, very important. Okay, I stop here.
No, don't stop there. I want you to keep talking because you made some very interesting points. But with respect to Russia, I heard you explain that the important shift in Japanese strategic thinking has moved from a Hokkaido defense to a Southwest island defense, representing a shift in the threat profile. But talk, if you would, a moment first about Russia more broadly as a geopolitical challenge or risk to Japan. And secondly, you didn't focus on a direct threat from the DPRK, from North Korea. And I wondered if you could also say a few words about that.
Certainly, Russian behavior is not present for us. But still, I don't think that the possibility of Russian invasion into Hokkaido area is not very high. If they come, we can fight. We can expel them. Okay? In the case of North Korea, the biggest objective for them is to get money from Japan, like ROK got money in 1965. Therefore, it's not very likely for them to shoot us with the nuclear weapons. But China is different. China may recently, in China, there are more books and articles are published on the issue of San Francisco Peace Treaty, which is decided the belongings, which decided the post-war border, and also there are some the articles are to be published on the issue of Okinawa, in the 1880s, which was just in the disputes between Qing dynasty and Japan. Therefore, they are continuing the support to the aggressive activities towards Senkaku Islands. And also, as I said, Japan is supporting the building Coast Guard in South China Sea, Philippines, and so forth. Because of that, the number of the Chinese vessels coming to Senkaku has decreased. We are on a common front together with the Southeast Asia. And that's probably why recently Mr. Ishiba made a visit to Southeast Asia. And then I think I do not have much information about that. Still, it's not enough. We have to make it more offensive to get those countries. And fortunately, this is a year of last year we celebrated our relationship with ASEAN countries. And also this year, Malaysia is a president of the ASEAN countries. So we should continue our offensive to Southeast Asia. And then China's, I guess that the Chinese economy has seen its peak, therefore, but still it does not mean that it is all safe, The support from the rural area for Xi Jinping is still very strong. In the urban area, like in Shanghai and other places, there are many people who have visited Japan, who think Japanese, but things are different in the rural area. And that was the political basis of Xi Jinping. So we have to continue our effort.
Well, it does not come as a surprise that as you paint a picture of Japan's geopolitical and national security concerns, China comes first. And your point that the ability to deter China across the board is in large part a function of the perception of whether or not the United States is fully committed to the defense of Taiwan. That is a central variable in the equation. Also, you flag importantly the issue of competition for influence in critical regions, particularly in Southeast Asia, Chinese behavior in the South China Sea. And I think implicitly, at least there too, you're suggesting that U.S. resolve, U.S. willingness to make outreach and to take initiatives is an important factor. But as you say, that Japan has an important role as well. And you mentioned things like the the aftershocks in the East Asia region from the war in the Middle East, as well as from the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Where we asked the public intellectuals in Southeast Asian countries, which country is most important to your country? The answer might be usually China or United States. You know, now United States is now overshadowed by China. But another question, which country do you trust most? It's Japan, in most of the opinion polls. Therefore, Japan-U.S. combination is a very strong, combination over there. So we have to make more cooperation. So Japan, supported by the United States, is a very important, in a sense, it's a kind of international public goods in South China Sea and Southeast Asia. We have to deepen this approach.
I think you're pointing to a really important dynamic, which is that for many developing countries, there's no appetite for a full alignment, an exclusive alignment with a major power. That, as an Indonesian diplomat friend of mine told me not too long ago, we're not going to make a choice, or conversely, we are going to choose, and our choice is all of the above. We want something from each of you, the best of all worlds. And what that means is that to the extent that the United States and Japan are well aligned, we are providing more of what the countries themselves need and want, and hence are exerting influence, as opposed to merely warning them off China, which is not proven to be a very productive approach. So on that, Sheila, your thoughts, but also particularly how does this profile of risks and challenges to Japan or to the alliance, in your view, fit with the U.S. priorities, with the Trump 2.0 priorities and the domestic trends here in the United States?
Thank you, Danny. First of all, let me thank you and Emma Chanlett Avery and ASPI for inviting me. It's a privilege. It's a great day to be in New York. Kitaoka Sensei with us as well. You know, a lot of my comments you're going to hear and the audience will hear has a little bit of a Washington perspective on it. So in addition to looking at the Indo-Pacific and U.S.-Japan alliance, I just wanted to just end up where you and Kitaoka Sensei landed. You know, and the previous panel, I think, did a really nice job of laying out where the alliance is right now and what has the hard work that's gone into making this. And we often sort of say we're at a moment of unprecedented strategic convergence with Japan. And I think it's absolutely true. I think we see the world and the region. We may not bring the same tools to the region, but we certainly see the challenges in very similar ways. And as Kitaoka-san pointed out, that has expanded from the Indo-Pacific now to globally in the wake of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. But I think when I watch the Biden folks unfold this very difficult challenge with our Japanese partners, it's also been unprecedented in scope and pace. It has been a lot, and quickly is the way in which we've built this relationship together with our Japanese colleagues. And I think we may be a little spoiled. We may be a little spoiled by the pace and the scope that we've managed to accomplish, or that the two governments have managed to accomplish. And here, I think the Kishida cabinet deserves an awful lot of credit as well. So transitions in Washington take time, even if they're not as fundamentally transformative as I think this one is going to be. You know, you can take 9 to 10 months in a good transition to get all the people that you need in positions where they can start to make policy, especially foreign policy. So transitions, this is going to unfold over the course of 2025. The other piece here, of course, is that the world's not going to wait for us. I mean, they are slightly going to wait for us because they kind of want to see what's coming next. But some things have already been telegraphed by the incoming Trump administration, and I'll just lay out a few of them here that I think are going to be the president-elect's primary priorities. as he comes in. And I think this was also mentioned in the previous panel. Trade, obviously, the tariffs as leverage or as ultimate endgame, who knows? I'm not sure. Immigration is another place where the president has made it very clear that he will start from day one and will use the existing law, but will also think of new mechanisms to deal with what he and his administration see as our immigration problem. Deportation is a word that comes easily to the incoming administration. And so be prepared, because that will be very unnerving for our neighbors. It'll be very unnerving for the American people. And obviously, I can't predict what that will mean for the Indo-Pacific, but it's certainly something that will have foreign policy consequences. Ukraine and the relationship with Russia, I would put second up there. That has serious implications also for not just the partnership with Japan, but for how this administration proceeds globally. Getting both Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table, very difficult to do, but I think you're going to see a high priority placed on the president-elect's ability to sit down with those two warring countries and find a way to end the war. He has advertised it, he has claimed that he can do it, but I think it's also something pragmatically that many people in Europe as well as in the United States think the negotiating phase of this conflict really needs to begin. So this is not just a rhetorical priority for the incoming president. I think you'll find that there's a fairly healthy debate up on the Hill about this as well. Israel and Iran, I would put in a similar bucket. This is something, again, the president-elect has promised that he will put an end to the conflict. I am less aware of how he will deal with the Palestinian consequences, the genocide that's happened in the region, but also the weakened Iran in the regional military balance. This is going to be a very difficult settlement, I believe. Again, I am not a Middle Eastern expert, but you have very conflicted points of view across the American political spectrum on what needs to happen in the Middle East, and it's not all about Israel, but also whether or not there's an opportunity to be had there for the United States relationship with Iran. Professor Kitaoka has already mentioned China and Taiwan, and I'll just share my impressions rather than insights here. I think incoming President Trump is going to be very firm in his rhetoric with China, but you can already see by the invitation to Xi Jinping to come to the inauguration that he will also be inviting Xi and his government into a conversation, a reset, if you will. Now, what that means, I don't know, but I think we should keep our eye on a little bit that there is maybe some room for flexibility with President Trump's approach to China, in addition to his desire to use economic leverage to get what he thinks the United States' interests are. I am less convinced that a Trump administration will very easily move to committing itself to the defense of Taiwan. And I say this for two reasons. I think the President Trump in his first term, but also when he was out of office and now coming back, has made it very clear that he wants to end wars. He wants no more American engagement in war. And so there's a principled position there. We can all agree or disagree on that principle. But I think it's very hard for him to go back to his supporters then with the idea that the United States would overcommit or would promise Taiwan that it would be there to defend it. Now, I could be very wrong on this one, so I'm just putting that out there. But I think it's less clear what President Trump's approach to Taiwan is going to be. So there's where I see the kind of priorities, foreign policy priorities, that at least has been set up or advertised coming in. There's obviously many, many more. But let me talk also about another thing that's largely what we look at for in Washington. One is, what people do you bring in? Who do you bring in to make your policy? If you were in DC yesterday, there was probably a television screen behind your desk as the confirmation hearings for Pete Hegseth for the Secretary of Defense position were running throughout the town. But there's also, so people make policy is one shorthand for that in DC, but the other shorthand is that institutions really matter. So people matter to a certain degree, but the institutional structures, and this is getting me a little closer to the U.S.-Japan alliance and our agenda together towards the Indo-Pacific. We have a deep alliance. We have a long-standing alliance. We have deep networks of policy coordination in the alliance, both on both sides of the Pacific, in Tokyo and in Washington, D.C. You can only move the needle really so far, so fast, if you really want to fundamentally alter the relationship. I get no sense that the Trump administration will want to alter the alliance. And I think Merow used a really nice word, and I think it's a good word, is there'll be a lot of rebranding of the priorities, perhaps, of the way in which we talk about the strategic coordination that we do. There will be more infusion of burden-sharing expectations, right? But I think the basic premises that we discussed, or the panel before us discussed, I think those are going to hold. Now, the Quad meeting is going to come down to the foreign ministers level, in my speculation. It's already going to happen on the sidelines of the inauguration, is what it looks like. And the reason for that is that there's demand from Japan, Australia, and India for the Quad. And I think that's where our allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific are going to have to continue to make demands on the new administration, not to drop the ball on issues and venues where they think policy coordination is moving forward effectively. I would ignore the rebranding, but concentrate on the venues of cooperation, the mechanisms and the places and the ways in which the goals are set forward. That being said, Trump 2.0 is not going to look, in my mind, like Trump 1.0. And I think that's true for, you've seen it in the campaign, you've seen it in the debates, you've seen it in Project 2025. This is a group of people who are coming in, not just in the foreign policy side, but also in the domestic policy side, wanting to restructure the power of the federal government vis-a-vis the power of states to make choices. So this is that's a broad sweeping statement, but I think it helps you understand and place how much the restructuring of our federal civil service, for example, what form that might take, how the DOGE, I don't know how to pronounce that, Department of Government Efficiency is going to operate. But this is at its very core, rhetoric aside, this is a small government restructuring of power between federal and state. And so when it comes to, there's all kinds of concerns about the deep state and things like that. Again, put the rhetoric aside. I think there's an expectation here that foreign policy and security policy will be largely concentrated, as it was in Trump 1.0, in the White House. And so it won't be Secretary Marco Rubio, who I do expect to get confirmed rather easily. I don't think he will be running diplomacy writ large. I think it will come out of the White House, and that will be the Secretary's job, will be more in implementation. The Secretary of Defense, forgive me if I find that one very hard to predict, just given who the nominee is and the focal point on our military and our policies internal to the Pentagon. So I think that's a little bit less clear. But you've seen Eldridge Colby has been nominated for Undersecretary for Policy. He's been very well read and has spent a lot of time in Japan. So you know what his thinking looks like for the security side of things. One last thing to say is that in the first Trump administration, there were a lot of vacancies of political appointees in the Department of State, the Department of Defense, the Justice Department. And so these are the places where I would pay attention to the kinds of people that may be filling those positions and or may not be filling those positions. Because I think a lot of what our alliance counts on is that we have people like Danny and like others in the room who have kept the mechanisms of alliance cooperation going. And again, the agenda may change slightly in tone and tenor, but this will not necessarily be the case, that we won't have that kind of apparatus of alliance management as healthy and far-reaching as it has been in the past. One last thing, if I may, Danny, on the regional piece that you and Kitaoka Sensei were discussing. And that is fundamentally what we are talking about inside the council and in other places, is this question of China, Russia, DPRK, and of course, Iran, but I'm just going to focus on China, Russia, and the DPRK. To what extent President Trump and his team will see that cooperation as something to respond to, in other words, our allies and the United States need to take into account what they are doing together. That's going to be a really critical first step for me in how we understand what the Trump administration's Indo-Pacific policy is going to look like. We are going to get resources to our Indo-Pacific Command. Our military-to-military coordination will be fine. We're going to get, to some degree, a burden-sharing conversation, but a fairly positive view to our Indo-Pacific alliances. As I said, I think the foreign ministerial piece will continue the Quad dialogue. But I don't know if we're going to get an administration that fundamentally sees China, Russia, and the DPRK as an axis of cooperation and contention on the balance in military balance and strategic balance in Northeast Asia. And that will be something that will be very important for the alliance looking ahead.
Well, great points. Very interesting. Thank you, Sheila. And I'd like to come back in a few minutes to the question of the China-Russia DPRK axis. And to your point, I mean, the U.S.-Japan alliance is very deeply embedded in the deep state and maybe under some assault in that, from that direction. I mean, much of what you said I would characterize as glass half full, and I'll push you a little on the half empty part of the glass, which is we've already seen a certain amount of ally bashing, tough words and tough talk, if not threats, against Canada and others and so on. You raised trade and tariffs, you raised immigration and deportation. These are all very concerning and perhaps unsettling themes for an ally, Japan. If, as you suggest, the Trump 2.0 administration is seeking for if not a shortcut, a path to try to tamp down the war, Russia's war against the Ukraine. Japan has famously endorsed the position that it is critically important to safeguard the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Ukraine, and that Ukraine today is East Asia tomorrow. Is that a seam that is ready to open in the alliance approach? And similarly with China, if President Trump is willing to invite Xi Jinping to attend his inauguration and dance at the inaugural ball, if there's a shift in approach to China coming, and there were, of course, at least one, maybe two dramatic shifts towards China during the first Trump presidency, where does that leave Japan? And with respect to Taiwan, as Professor Kitaoka was saying, if the United States is not willing to convincingly project its determination, its resolve to safeguard Taiwan's status, what does that mean for Japan? So are you also seeing rumblings of division and uncertainty in the alliance?
I was just, we were both in Tokyo in November, and just after the election, of course, we had our private conversations where people would tell us what they really thought. And then there were the more public renditions of a much more optimistic, calm, it's okay, we'll be fine, we are democracies after all, that kind of more optimistic rendering. I believe two things for the U.S.-Japan alliance, and I'll just toss this as a ball for Kitaoka Sensei to correct me or to develop further. But the terms of the if we are entering into ceasefire talks, and I believe that's where we're headed in 2025 between Russia and Ukraine, and we're seeing in the eastern part of Ukraine and in the western part of Russia. We're seeing the two armies try to get as much gains as they can, to damage each other as much as they can, I believe, in an effort to set the table for the best possible outcome. But I have a hard time understanding the terms upon which then President Trump would seek to, impose, if you will, compromise on Ukraine and convince Vladimir Putin that he should stay out of Ukraine going forward. I don't think there's a lot of political appetite either in Europe or in the United States for Ukraine joining NATO. That would be a very interesting way to sort of put your stake down and say that's enough, to Russia. I don't see that coming out of a Trump administration, but we can continue to watch that as we may. I think for Japan and for our European allies, a heavy-handed, forced compromise for Ukraine will not be acceptable. There's been too much invested by our European allies in not allowing that to happen. So I think it will produce, I don't know if Japan would respond overtly to that, so I'm going to defer to Kitaoka-san on that point. But I do feel that there would be a huge tension in our relationship with NATO. There would be a huge tension in our relationship with the Europeans writ large if we were going to strong-arm Ukraine into accepting a compromise that they really don't want to make. I think the bigger question, and this is something that it was alluded to in the first panel, leadership transitions, right, ongoing, and the political changes that are ongoing in Europe suggest to me that the Europeans are also going to have a pretty serious conversation themselves about whether or not Russia is actually a threat, whether or not NATO did the right thing. And so you see in Germany and you see in France, right, you see these leadership transitions, but you also see pushback on the far right against the European Union itself, but also against inviting the kind of aggression that Russia brought to bear in Ukraine. So I don't think any of us could probably answer that question, Danny, but I do think these ripple effects, these undercurrents of consequence for us and our allies, Japan, obviously, but also in Europe, I think are going to be really, really critical. I think the China-Taiwan piece, there are so many vested interests in the not vested interests, that's not the right word. There are people with very strong opinions, I should say. It's not vested interests, it's points of view on Capitol Hill, in our Congress, that it would be very hard for the Trump administration to just blatantly say, we're not going to defend Taiwan. But I don't feel that we would get the kind of comment by President Trump that we heard from President Biden. Will you defend Taiwan? Yes. And then have the White House staff, reiterate the longstanding U.S. policy on the issue. I think President Trump's inclination is to avoid getting involved in a conflict with China. And Taiwan, for him, would be better solved by strengthening Taiwanese defenses. That's why I think President Lai was very smart to up his ask for military equipment from the United States and also to demonstrate that he's ready to do more to demonstrate Taiwan's own capabilities. But it leaves Japan in, I think, a very awkward position here. And all of the work that our ministries of defense and departments of defense and our militaries have been doing over the past 3 or 4 or 5 years to exercise, to clarify, to create the command and control structures that we're about to launch this year, that has all been in preparation for a signal to China, but also an actual potential crisis where we may have to fight together. So we've got an integrated structure building. The politics at the top may be shifting in a different direction. I just don't know that, I don't know where we're headed on that. But for Tokyo, I think that would be top of, and Kitaoka-san put it at the top of his list, but that would be at the top of my list, is where is this Trump administration going to go on this?
Well, Kitaoka-sensei, you're welcome to respond to any of that. But in particular, I'm curious, you touched on Quad, Sheila's mentioned Quad, and when we were listening to Merow, she ticked through a number of these minilateral or plurilateral arrangements, whether it's the U.S.-Japan-Korea trilateral or U.S.-Japan-Philippine trilat, whether it's the Quad itself, frankly, the G7, of course, 2023 was a banner and very productive year for the G7. AUKUS Pillar 2, which Japan is being drawn into, and so on. And I'm very curious, in light of these external challenges and threats, and in light of some of the stress points, if not divergences, an approach or priority between the new U.S. government and the Japanese government. How do you feel about the prospects for these groupings to continue to flourish and continue to function? Sheila made an interesting point that the Australians and the Indians and perhaps Japan were in favor of an early meeting with the Trump administration to try to exert some influence and to get things going. And that has the ring of truth to it, to me. But there's a bigger question about their durability and their prospects.
Can I say a few words to the point made by you? And then I made a visit to Ukraine in October. And then I was asked to speak about the Russo-Japanese War from 1904 to 5. And then I said something like, you know, in the Russo-Japanese War, we had to fight with the Cossack from Ukraine. And also there are many soldiers from Poland. And also some military from Finland, because they are part of the Russian Empire at that time. That is, by so doing, they are trying to protect the central part of Russian Empire. You know, they are trying to keep the Moscow, St. Petersburg area as a safe place. That's quite similar to what Russia is doing right now. That's why they are using the prisoners and the minorities, Wagners, and so that no bad influence is coming to the Moscow and the other area. That means that Russia is in a vulnerable situation. And also the number of casualties in fighting is much more in Russia because they are making a very difficult strategy over there. Therefore, you know, of course, the solution, peace is very, very difficult over there. But still, you know, when we consider about the peace, there are a couple of conditions that are necessary. First of all, we have to draw the line, border or line of armistice or whatever you may call it. At least we have to draw the line. And then possibly Russia insists that 4 states in eastern south and also Crimea should come to Russia. But who will guarantee that this promise can be kept? Very difficult. Usually, theoretically, it is to be guaranteed by NATO. But that's what Russia, the Putin is rejecting very much. But instead, joining the Ukraine may make a promise that Ukraine may not join NATO for the coming 20 years or so. But still 20 years, even 20 years, that will not accepted by Putin. They instead, there's a possibility of bringing some soldiers from France and other European countries to there. But still it's very difficult. You know, even if there is a line drawn between Ukraine and Russia, still, you know, the line is very unfavorable to the Ukrainian people. Therefore, I think there will be a uprising, resistance on the part of Western Ukraine, to which Russia will make more offensive to them. And also Russia may apply more pressure to the, you know, Moldova, and Georgia, and then in the neighboring area. Russian political influence is not negligible. Therefore, by so doing, it's impossible to expect a peace, endurable peace. So this is the time for us to get united to, you know, continue to resistance against Russia. You know, that's the better way to think. Going back to the Taiwan-China issue, you know, what I'm saying that we have to say that we will definitely support Taiwan. And then if there's a more possibility of U.S. joining and Japan joining to support Taiwan, then China may not do that, okay? As a result, it's less costly. But if we show some ambiguity, then they may start aggressiveness. Then that may become very costly. Or there are, though it may sound ironical, but still maintenance of the tough policy is less costly. And I would suggest to Mr. Trump to do so. Just remember what happened in Afghanistan. You know, Mr. Biden just showed the American troops should be withdrawn by the end of August. Then the Taliban offensive started, okay? And when Mr. Biden said, we will not send any American soldiers to Ukraine, then the Putin invasion was accelerated. Therefore, maintenance of the tough policy is important. On the other hand, we have to make a more study about the possible scenario of working together. You know, I usually say to the students, make more preparation for the examination, then you can be successful. Therefore, the military, by definition, military is doing the training unless they are fighting, okay? On the other hand, China is planning how to make an offensive to Misawa or Sasebo or Kadena. And we have to do this kind of preparation. Then the result might be peace. You know, how to prepare for this is very, very important. Showing the ambiguity or providing some, you know, kindness or making some easy deal is more dangerous. That's what I think. And also I have to add one more thing. This is not by Mr. Trump, but actually this was declared by Mr. Biden. Well, this is the issue of the purchase of Japan Steel of U.S. Steel, okay? Because of the possible threat for security. You know, is it security? How does it, you know, threaten the American security? This may have a, you know, repercussion in Japan, I'm afraid. Is the United States seriously thinking about us as an ally? No? You know, between those alliances, the purchase of a private business, how does this causes a threat to this will, I'm afraid, you know, this may revive the anti-American people group in Japan. I hear that former Prime Minister, you know, Hatoyama may be happy in saying this kind of thing. So the alliance is a very difficult thing to maintain. And also deterrence consists of a lot of things. You know, China may be happy, or North Korea may be happy to hear that. You know, as I believe that Dan can remember that when there was a you know, tsunami in Japan in 2011, and the U.S. did a very courageous, heroic support to Japan, that worked as a deterrence to China. You know, this kind of showing our cooperation, stronger relationship between us is a very important kind of thing. So this kind of, you know, decision made by Biden is, I'm not very happy with that.
Well, I won't contest some of your claims, but if in fact Japan is focused on the danger of, you didn't use the word appeasement, but insufficient resolve to sustain deterrence, whether it's in dealing with Russian aggression in the Ukraine or whether it's China's temptation to use military force against Taiwan. And if there are these other emerging problems, Nippon Steel, the invocation of national security as to suggest that the U.S. feels some threat from its close ally, Japan, which is insulting and hard to understand, I'm sure. Given these strains and given some of the externalities that we were talking about, where does that really leave the Quad? Where does that really leave the Camp David trilat? Where does that leave the idea of collective action by the G7 or work in AUKUS, these kind of mini-lateral institutions that Merow described and had a hand in sustaining and growing and cultivating. She seemed confident that the past is prologue, that these will continue. But has the value equation changed? How do you see these mini-laterals evolving or functioning in the period ahead?
You know, it depends. It is different from one country, one mini-lateral to another. Okay, I was appointed to be a member of the Wiseman Group between Japan and India in year 2000. And after that, as an ambassador to the United Nations, I worked hard together with India, Germany, and Brazil to promote the Security Council reform. So I have a kind of a lot of experience with India. So India is a very much reliable partner as a deterrence in the south against China. But we cannot expect much from India for their coming to us to help us in the Taiwan area. But India has its own interest in Southeast Asia and also Taiwan area on economic activities. So we can rely on that and we can support this one. And on the other hand, we have to understand what India is really willing to get. Indians' development is wonderful, but still India is very poor in a rural area. And then Indian, women are not very happy in a situation. So they need a lot of assistance. It was the relation between Modi and Abe was going on very well. As a JICA president, I had a lot of support from Abe-san and Modi-san. Modi was always smiling when we speak about Abe. And also, they wanted to industrialize India. And also, they wanted to make the very poor area of the India in the northeastern area. And then that is very necessary. So the support of India to make them grow gradually, and that may become a deterrence against China. But we cannot expect much more beyond it. And the relationship with Australia is very different. Australia is a very important partner for us, so we really hope that we can work together. And with Korea, actually, I have been together with my friends. I was planning to celebrate 60th anniversary of the Treaty of 1965. So the several weeks ago, the event was very much shocking to us. But political change is always possible in South Korea. I was relatively optimistic than other people because, the difficult relationship between Japan and Korea is caused by two things. One is that they are, they have a resentment against Japan. But now, because of Korean development, now the per capita basis is not so different. We are just on the same level. Therefore, they are relatively overcoming the kind of inferiority complex against Japan. Secondly, the northern threat is becoming more real. Therefore, even the opposition party cannot take the same policy like Moon Jae-in administration, the previous one. But still, because of terrible fighting between the opposition and the government party, I cannot tell anything. But still, South Korea is very necessary partner for us. And then I hope we can apply pressure. But on the other hand, there's a possibility of Mr. Trump to try to withdraw American troops from Korean Peninsula. Then that may result in a possibility of South Korea going to nuclear armament. And then what Japan will do is another big question, which we don't like to face. But actually, logically, there are three choices. One is that for Japan, to try to block the South Korean nuclear armament. One. Second, doing nothing. Third, to go to nuclear armament together. Those are, none of which is very much desirable, but still we have to also think about that. Anyhow, in that sense, the maintenance of status quo is better.
But what I'm hearing, Kitaoka Sensei, is a fairly high level of confidence that it is both in Japan's interests and it is politically possible for Japan to be sufficiently patient, ride out political developments in Korea, and try to sustain the bilateral progress that has been made, and subject to what the Trump administration chooses to do, perhaps to be able to sustain the trilateral cooperation that has been built up in the course of the last 3 years or so. So that's encouraging.
Actually, when I heard about his plan of purchase of Greenland or Panama Canal or Canada, I'm surprised. But still, I had a second idea that this might be to cover up the other kind of difficulties. He just made a compromise that, he used to say that the Ukraine situation can be solved in 1 day. Now he says it takes at least half a year. So he's becoming a bit realistic. That's my hope or wishful thinking. Tell me.
Okay, so the proposal to acquire Greenland has been established as an example of becoming reasonable. That's a little stretch, but please.
So just on that, though, I think, and this is where the rhetoric versus the actual policy, that we just have to keep our antenna up. Two things strike me about the Greenland, Canada, Mexico, kind of the Gulf of America as opposed to the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, it's a very interesting focus, at least in the North American side, of a sort of refurbished Monroe Doctrine, kind of. And it intimates a little bit of, we've been thinking that what's coming in with the Trump administration is a little bit more of the traditional peace through strength approach, which I think would make Japanese feel a lot better about the Trump administration's engagement in the Indo-Pacific, if it is the more traditional peace through strength. And that reference is made in the hearings, the Pete Hegseth confirmation hearings. It's been used by Robert O'Brien in his Foreign Affairs article. But that seems to be a very, Marco Rubio uses it quite frequently. So that's a kind of understandable doctrine for the United States, right? It may be more unilateralist and less multilateralist, but it is at least identifiably a strong America that is going to be engaged in a way that would maybe make our allies feel a little bit more comfortable. But what's emerging with Greenland and Canada and Mexico, maybe a lot of rhetoric and it's just bombast and maybe we don't have to worry about it. But it's starting to sound a little bit more like spheres of influence thinking, that we leave the Europeans, Europe to the Europeans. We leave Asia to Japan and South Korea, and the Asians can take care of those problems. We're going to focus here on being the North American, the big power, and we'll decide how we engage from there. Now, I may be projecting too far with this, but it is a kind of, as we think about the way in which President Trump or President-elect Trump sees the world, I don't think it's an accident that Greenland and Canada, that there's all this stuff going on. Maybe tactical, and I think this got brought up in the previous panel, maybe tactical for different reasons to get people to the table. But I wouldn't rule out that fundamentally there's a kind of imperialist drive, not isolationist, but imperialist drive to the president, and he's quite willing to exercise it in these kinds of bombastic ways, but actually there's more serious ideas under there about American interests. So just a cautionary note that Greenland's not safe yet, but we should pay attention to why Mexico, Canada, why the Gulf of America, why getting people back out into the countries in Central America where they belong. I think there's more to it than just being bombastic.
Well, there's a lot to that. But in the last minute or two we have on this program, let's draw it back to the alliance, if we could. And My last question to both of you is, we heard, and we're very familiar with, we heard from Merow, instances of, examples of the tremendous progress that's been made in the U.S.-Japan alliance structures itself, whether it is the greater interoperability, joint planning and training, the acquisition, command and control modernization, specifically the joint operations command, et cetera. And in fact, very importantly, although I don't know that anyone mentioned it, huge steps forward in defense industry coordination and cooperation. So these are real world, genuinely meaningful structural advances, not whims and not just talking points. But are they durable? Will they continue? And how does the politics in Washington of a Trump 2.0 and the politics in Tokyo of a Ishiba minority government that may or may not outlast the July upper house elections, how does that affect the prospects for the alliance growth itself? Would you like to start?
I can start. So I think the leadership transition we're about to have is a kind of more foundational transition, challenging some of our basic ideas and our foreign policies. I think in Japan, the challenge is going to be implementation. I don't think Prime Minister Ishiba or whoever succeeds him, if he is indeed replaced this year or next, I don't think there's going to be a challenge to Japanese foreign policy or to alliance policy. I don't think it's in the foundational foreign policy challenge that we're looking at in Japan. So implementation will be harder. The defense tax, the funding of the goals that are already set out, how to get America, to stop bashing on allies and trade, those kinds of things. I think the challenge in Japan, and Kitaoka-san mentioned this already, but I'll just echo it, is public perceptions of the alliance are everything, right? And so just like American debates about our alliances, are they good for America, or are they just too much of a burden, or why can't people defend themselves? Those ideas are now readily expressed among the American public. And so there's a conversation to be had there. I think there's a conversation to be had that's emerging in Japan also. It may not go back to a DPJ leader as the right place to go for ideas, but it is a question, and I think this is where the Nippon Steel reaction is really pretty fundamentally important. Like, why are we being seen as a security threat? I think is a public perception in Japan that's really quite important. One thing that struck me, Danny, when you were sort of cataloging Quad and the trilaterals, these are all vehicles for problem solving. And so Japan lives in a more dangerous neighborhood. We need to have better deterrence. We need to take on more regional goals together. We need to create those mechanisms for doing it. We didn't talk about nuclear deterrence specifically, but my sense is that Russia's muddying the waters of nuclear doctrine is something that U.S. and Japan need to talk more about. Not only when are nuclear weapons going to be used in a conflict, what China's doctrine may be, is it changing as well as Russia's, but we've also got that blurred place of where nuclear and conventional weaponry can get things done in ways that they didn't used to be able to get things done. Precision, long-range missiles, things that we've seen in the war. So I think that's a problem that we ought to have a little bit more attention paid to. But I would say the alliance is in a pretty good spot in terms of our problem-solving capacities. Whether or not we've got the leaders who want to address these problems consistently over time, I think, is the question mark for me.
Well, Kitaoka-sensei, briefly, how do you evaluate the prospects of continuing to implement these important alliance operational principles?
Well, before that, let me speak about the stability or instability of Japanese politics. Okay, I once wrote that there's no big difference between Ishiba or Noda or Tamaki or other ADP candidates who fought against Ishiba except for Takaichi. I have some reservation against her because, she is rather bold or careless in handling Chinese issue. China has to handled very carefully. That kind of carefulness is lacking on the part of her. And also, certainly there are some political struggle between LDP and other opposition parties. Still, the issue of China is so big, so they may avoid careless fighting each other. Therefore, they will make a cooperation on many issues. Therefore, compared to other countries, other democracies, Japan's politics is rather stable. You know that I'm not supportive to Elon Musk's support of AfD or other countries. European countries have their own difficulties. But compared to them, Japanese politics is relatively safe. Actually, I have to take a flight this midnight and to come back to Tokyo to attend a conference in which I'm a deputy chair on the priority of defense planning. And then the defense planning, certainly, you know, its cost is enormous. But still, you know, we cannot do everything at once. So we have to prioritize which we should do first. Probably the biggest weak point is that we cannot get enough personnel in self-defense forces. How to raise their salary, how to get those young people to SDF, and also in order to do that, we have to change the obsolete culture in SDF. Those are the main priorities. Also, the cyber is another priority. On the other hand, exporting weapons that may vitalize Japan's defense industry should go on. That does not need any much money. So by prioritizing from one after another, so we don't have to set the ceiling as of now. So far, we will prioritize and then touch upon, try to get one after another important steps. So let's forget about the ceiling and then let's tackle the most important issues.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, our time has run out. And before I hand the floor back to Emma, please join me in thanking Professor Kitaoka and Dr. Sheila Smith